Welcome to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. This is a show about all things University of Louisville, where we talk to researchers, students, professors, other folks about what's going on at the University of Louisville and what they're doing at the University of Louisville. So what have we got on the show today? Well, what does the future hold in terms of jobs, communication, transportation, and just plain daily living? UofL Futurist and Professor Nat Irvin will be here to talk about the future. And UofL is looking for folks to take part in a research project involving pollution and health, and we'll give you details about that and how you might be able to get involved. But first, if you're a kid or a pregnant woman and you smoke marijuana, you're going to be hearing some bad news in the next 10 minutes or so. Dr. Shivani Naik is a research scholar and a resident in the School of Medicine, and she's studying neurology, and she's been looking at studies of marijuana's impact on the brain. Shivani, good to see you. Dr. Naik?
Hi, same here.
So you're a resident in neurology in the School of Medicine, right?
Yes. I just started my residency here at University of Louisville, and in the past I have been doing research in the Department of Neurology.
Okay. Well, congratulations, first off.
Thank you.
To get that big title doctor, that's a big deal. So congratulations on that.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well, you've done some looking at various studies of marijuana and its impact on teenagers, pregnant women, others. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your research?
Yes. So marijuana as a drug, it is one of the most common illicit use drugs overall in the United States. And the prevalence of the drug use of marijuana among the people over here is more than 120,000 million people are exposed to marijuana. And at the same time, we have seen an increase in the recruitment of the new users for about like 2.5 million of new users have been adding to this list every year. And the most chunk of it is from the adolescent young adults, which have been...
Well, that makes sense, though. As kids get a little bit older, they try marijuana and they smoke marijuana, right?
Yeah. So that's how it is. And it's the use has been increasing over the years. The epidemiological data has been going up since then. And to talk about the scientific facts of marijuana that we have seen is marijuana is from the plant called cannabis. And we have like two components of cannabis. One is the cannabidiol, which is the therapeutic component, which is used for the medicinal purposes. And the other component is THC, which is called as tetrahydrocannabinoid, and which has more of a psychoactive potential. And that is the reason why people get dependent or addicted to marijuana over here.
And so you just said something that a lot of people would disagree with, that people get addicted to marijuana.
I know. It's a controversial issue that if whether or not marijuana is addictive or no. But there have been a research, especially in these last 10 years, which have reported that marijuana, along with the other addictive drugs, have the same mechanism of getting addicted. And what does marijuana do is primarily, it increases dopamine, that is a chemical in the brain. So as the other addictive drugs, for example, heroin and cocaine, they all have the same increase in the chemical of dopamine. And when the dopamine is high in the brain, you get the feeling of highness and you feel pleasurable, you enjoy that feeling. And that is just a vicious cycle that we have. The more dopamine, the more you feel like doing it again. And even that's how marijuana works too, along with the other drugs. So I don't think marijuana does have addictive potential. Depending on the research that we have so far.
Okay, and you did a lot of, again, we're talking to Dr. Shivani Naik with the School of Medicine in the Department of Neurology. She's a resident in neurology. And you've done a lot of research looking at what have been some of the research studies in the past on pregnant women and teenagers. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
So what does marijuana do is typically it acts on the endocannabinoid receptors in the brain. These receptors,
the what receptors?
The cannabinoid receptors.
Okay.
It's basically the endo is like for the internal, and cannabinoid receptors. These are the most abundant receptors present in our brain. And why these receptors are present is for the endogenous chemical to act on these receptors to further formulate the neural modulation, formulate the connections within the brain. And what happens with marijuana is marijuana gets attached to these receptors and formulates their own connections. And basically the area which is affected because of marijuana is normally helps in regulating attention, memory, emotions, forming a motor aspect, your cognitive abilities, and all this areas get affected, and you see the further deficits in your memory and attention.
Long-term?
Long-term deficits, and most of the times it is irreversible.
Okay, so is that just in young minds, young brains that you're talking about, that this deficit is irreversible, or is it in people that are 30 years old and are smoking a lot of marijuana?
Mostly the correlation has been made the younger you start using marijuana, the more deficits that you will likely see in the future.
And what have previous studies shown when a teenage boy starts at age, say, 15, 16, smoking a little bit of marijuana with his buddies?
Yeah.
Can that have a long-term impact on that 15 or 16-year-old's brain and his memory and his ability to make decisions?
Well, definitely. The younger you use, especially if you start using marijuana when you're age less than 17, the more impact you have over the brain deficits. And if you have like a chronic smoker, and that is even more. If you do the marijuana every day, you eventually hamper all these areas, and you will have a long-term deficit seen in these areas.
Is it the same for people who use alcohol, or is it similar to, or are there any studies that show that long-term alcohol use impacts the same amount of brain tissue and other things long-term?
So we have like alcohol studies and nicotine studies, because those are the two major other usage that we have seen, and they as well have the same impact that we can see on marijuana. But it is very long term. The effects of the alcohol can be seen after like many years, but the marijuana effects are very short term. You just smoke it for 2-3 years and you will see these effects right away.
And the main effects, the main impact on people who start at a young age are
Yes.
what? What'd you say, memory, and what were the other things?
So memory gets affected, your decision-making power gets affected, and your attention span gets affected, and you get very anxious, and you don't have a proper cognitive abilities to perform the day-to-day task.
Okay. Again, I think you're probably people listening to this are saying that smoke marijuana are saying, come on, that's BS. I don't buy that. I think it's just the same impact as alcohol has on my brain. It's not gonna hurt me that much. But you would say that there's been plenty of studies that show that it can.
And at the same time, what I would like to add is marijuana has been termed as a gateway drug. So what the studies over the epidemiological data that we have seen shows that many of the users who are now smoking cocaine, heroin, and other drugs have started with marijuana. So once you start with marijuana, you get addicted to that kind of feeling, and later on you go on to smoke other drugs, do other things as compared to what they were doing before.
But I think, as I recall, the studies also show that the majority of marijuana smokers the overwhelming majority do not go on to tougher drugs like cocaine, heroin, those kinds of things. I think, as I recall, I saw that study somewhere, and that it can be a gateway drug, so that those who do go on to harder drugs
typically
started with marijuana, but that
yeah.
the overwhelming majority of marijuana users do not go on to those harder
drugs.
drugs.
But at the same time, for the chronic users of marijuana, it's not even good, right? I mean, no matter if you go on to other drugs or no, or if you continue smoking marijuana, even that is not a healthy way. And you further develop all these deficits.
I'm talking to Dr. Shivani Naik. She is in neurology at the School of Medicine at the University of Louisville, and we're talking about her studies of marijuana's impact on the brain. We haven't talked about pregnant women. Pregnant women normally are pretty good about not drinking alcohol.
Yes.
I assume are pretty good about not smoking marijuana or taking any drugs, but what could be the impact if you're even a casual marijuana user and you're pregnant with a child?
So when you're pregnant with a child, it has a lot of impact, because marijuana, it passes and it goes on to the child as well. So at that period of time, there's a lot of neural development that is happening, and that impacts a lot of connectivity in the child's brain. And further on, we can see younger usage of marijuana in that specific child whose mother was taking marijuana during the pregnancy.
Okay, so it can trickle into the baby's system, but once the child is born, is there any indication that there are any long-term impacts on that child once it's born?
So one of the impact is there's a high correlation of child starting taking marijuana, and the youngest age for that child to start marijuana is 9 years of age, as compared to the normal adolescents.
9?
Yes. Yeah.
So we got kids smoking marijuana at age 9.
Especially in the females who were taking marijuana when they were pregnant.
So to wrap this up now, what would you tell parents who know their kids are smoking dope at age 16 or 17?
First of all, I would like to say in today's generation and today's adolescent people, the perception of the risk of marijuana has been gone down significantly. That is like a 75% decrease in the reduction of the risk perception in them because of the legalization and decriminalization that has been happening. So what we can do from our standpoint is educate them and let them know that what are the risks of marijuana, and the earlier you start smoking that, you end up going to have some deficits. And that's what we can do from the prevention standpoint, because as of now, we do not have any treatment for marijuana addiction. The only thing what we have is preventional intervention that we can definitely try on.
Okay. All right. Dr. Shivani Naik, research scholar, resident in neurology in the School of Medicine. Good luck with your
Thank
residency.
you.
Nobody knows what the future holds, right? Well, Nat Irvin is a professor and assistant dean of thought leadership and civic engagement in UofL's College of Business, and he does have all the answers for what's coming up in the future, right, Nat?
I love that. Yeah, right. I can tell you it's going to rain in a few minutes.
And that's about it, because that will be the future, right? All right, Nat Irvin, appreciate you being on the show.
Absolutely, Mark.
What is the assistant dean of thought leadership and civic engagement in the College of Business? What's that mean?
Well, actually, it was a new position created by the dean, Todd Moradian, last fall, who approached me to begin thinking about how we might incorporate the work that I've been doing for some time, since I've been here since 2007, with extending the notion of thought leadership, leading with ideas for the broad community, how I might take that idea, that concept of how a university such as the University of Louisville and the College of Business, who, obviously we explored a lot of topics, social, political, economic, and technological issues, but how would you take that and put that in the broader context of everything that the College of Business is already doing? So I guess you would say, in summary, it is the idea of being more aggressive about it, more comprehensive about it. And, I've written, obviously, a lot about issues that fall into the category of what we would call thought leadership. But the dean created this new position, actually just started formally the fall of last year.
Last year, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You call yourself a futurist. You teach, but you call yourself a futurist. What is a futurist?
Well, this whole notion of studying the future is a field of study that's been around for maybe about 70 or 80 years, and that is people who dedicate themselves exclusively to studying the unknown, the idea of being able to, not necessarily to predict the future, because obviously people predict the future, but that's not really what futurists do. What futurists do is help to stretch the imagination, to help people to conceive of what are the possibilities. And given the possibilities, stories of the future, how might you react given information? And so that's essentially what a futurist does. And what I teach in my course called Managing in the Future is helping my students to think about the long-term, mid to long-term social, political, economic, and technological trends, and how might they impact them as managers. And one of the odd things about being a futurist, Mark, and I suspect most people would know this, but is that I spend most of my time reading deep history. In other words,
history's bound to repeat itself. So.
Well, but it's and when I say history, I don't mean the last 100 years, because that was yesterday or this morning. Well, I spend most of my time reading history from, oddly enough, the 13th century, 14th century, 15th, 16th, 17th century.
Did they have iPads back then?
Well, they didn't, but they had social media. They did have, the printing press, or the beginning of the printing press. When you look at the Reformation, for example, it is a beautiful example of transformation using social media. That's what Martin Luther did.
Right.
And so I spent a lot of time looking at deep, long trends and how did people respond in the midst of uncertainty. So that's really one of the benefits of being a futurist. And of course, as a kid, and I'll wrap this up, I've been fascinated with the notion of thinking about the future. My mom says since I was 6.
Really?
Yeah, I always wanted to know what happens next.
What happens next?
And so that people who fall into the category of being a futurist are the people who always want to know what happens next. Right?
We're talking with Nat Irvin, who's a professor in the College of Business and also an assistant dean. Well, let's talk about the future.
Sure.
If you're looking into your crystal ball, what are we looking at 20, 25 years from now in terms of transportation, entrepreneurship, business, economy, jobs, that kind of stuff?
Well, that's actually, I would say this, that you have the convergence First of all, there are two major several, but I'm going to pick out two major driving forces for the future. And the most important one, I think, of the two that I'm going to talk about would be what happens when artificial intelligence becomes cheap, when it becomes a commodity. In other words, when we think about light now, you don't even think about light, do you?
No.
No, when you walk into a room, you don't think about flipping on a switch. We don't even think about that at all because it is so prevalent. It's everywhere. But if you go back 100 years or a little bit further than that, light would have been very, very expensive. It would cost you a lot to be able to read. You go even further back, no wonder very few people could read because very few people had time to read. Then, of course, you didn't have light. And when it got dark, what were you going to use? Candles? Well, those are very expensive. But now that we think about what light did, when we had electricity that transforms everything, it transformed the economy because now we have this commodity called light. That's what artificial intelligence will be like, is now, and that is it becomes embedded into everything. So when you think about transportation, it will be driven by artificial intelligence. When you think about learning, higher education, in terms of the way that we deliver new models of learning, all of that is driven by artificial intelligence. If you look at the research that's being done in terms of genetics, it's being done by artificial intelligence. So
what you're saying,
there is no aspect of our economy that will not be impacted by artificial intelligence. There are no exceptions.
I would say
Pick
there probably
one.
are going to be, don't you? Communication.
You
You
don't-
have to have human beings on talking about the
Oh,
news
sure.
of the day, those kind of things. But you don't need a human being. What you're saying is to drive a truck,
No.
teach a class.
No. Well, it's the role, it's the play. It's not saying replacement because that's a lot of times people think of
That's
that
scary.
as being, when you talk about artificial intelligence, you're saying replacing people.
Right.
That's not the model that I'm describing.
Okay.
What
What are
I'm
you saying?
describing is the augmentation, the partnership between artificial intelligence and human beings. In other words, you still have the capacity, or we still have the need for what would be called judgment, value. How much value do you place on something, information that you get? So it's not just the fact that you can do something. The question would be, should you do something? And that will not be an area that machines will be able to do for us in any time in the near future.
Moral judgments. Won't be able to make moral judgments.
Yeah, or even just the utility. How useful is some information?
So
Yeah.
how will it change, though? How will it change our lives? What do you see as the biggest change in Nat Irvin's daily life 25 years from now? Assuming you're still alive.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so. But I was going to say the other part of what's happening with us now is the profound changes in the demographic makeup of America. So this is worldwide, but I'm just speaking of America, and that is the rapid transition from a majority to a minority country, which is what drives a lot of my work, my interest, and the programs that I've been developing, both while I was at Wake Forest University and here at the University of Louisville. And that is, you see, people are just really, I think, Mark, unaware of how fast the demographics of America are actually changing and how old certain portions of America are becoming and why it's going to be absolutely important that we develop this next pool of talent. This is critical. This is not abstract. This is not a joke. We don't have enough people to take care of the needs that we're going to need for the future. The most common age of white America, this is not the median age, is about 58.
That's me.
Okay, there you go. Boom. There you go. Most common age. Think about how old that is.
Yeah, I'm pretty damn old, Nat.
Well,
Is that what you're trying to say?
well,
Mark,
I'm
you're
old.
pretty damn old?
I'm actually older than you are, right?
Well, you're really old, Nat.
Yeah, I'm a
So
lot.
what does that say, though? The average age of the white American is
Yeah, but not
58 years
average
old.
median, not median,
I'm
just
sorry.
most common age.
Most common age.
Yeah, most common age, mode
Okay.
versus median. But it just simply says that aging, however, when you look in every aspect of, and obviously some states more than others, you're going to see this divergence between white America and the browning of America. And what we've got to come reconcile ourselves with is how do we invest in the new America? It's in our self-interest. Look, the military doesn't have enough people. We don't have enough people to serve in the military. We don't have enough people to meet all the jobs that we need in the healthcare industry. Listen, I could go on and on about the shortages of people that we need for the opportunities and jobs that are of the future.
Right.
Yeah, right.
We're talking with Nat Irvin, who's a professor at the College of Business and also an assistant dean at the University of Louisville, the assistant dean of Thought, Leadership, and Civic Engagement. Big title there. What do you see as the future for your students, the ones right now that you're talking to? You said earlier that you want them to be prepared for what's coming down the road. What do you tell them? I mean, if they're going to go out in the business world and get jobs with Fortune 500 companies or whatever. Is that where you're telling them to look, or are you telling them to look for something else that will be more significant in 10, 15 years from now?
Well, that's a great question. I would say this. That one way to think about that is looking now. We have about 57 million people are employed in what's called the gig economy. And that means that represents people who have opted to do that because they don't want the corporate job. They don't want the 9-to-5 thing. They want more autonomy, more control. And because of the technologies, they're able to develop their own ways of creating wealth, platforms, contingent. In other words, they are able to, because of new technologies over the last 30 and 40 years, are able to create new forms of work. So to say that they are going to be in the corporate world, I don't say that. What I will say, though, is to come back to the earlier question you were asking, what is it that prepares them for the future? The younger you are, actually my MBA students as well, and I think this is one of the fundamental things that education can give you, and that is the ability to be able to think, the ability to be able to learn, the ability to be able to learn faster, giving you the tools for thinking. There will not be any one set skill that is going to help you to survive over the next 10 to 15, 20 years.
I love that, what you're doing at Central High School. What University of Louisville in general is
Absolutely.
doing at Central
And
High
all
School.
of our faculty, by the way, teach in the program.
That's awesome.
We have complete commitment.
That's
Yeah.
great stuff. And I think a lot of people don't know about that commitment that we have to West Louisville, the
Oh
Signature
man,
Partnership.
no, we're
and
in
all
it.
that.
We're in it.
Yep.
No,
Yep.
we're in it.
Congratulations to College of Business, to you, Nat Irvin. It's always a great time talking to you, and we'll spend another 10, 15 minutes talking in the future.
I love it, Bart.
All right. It is called the HEAL Study, and Dr. Rachel Keith from UofL's Environmental Health Institute is one of the researchers working on this study, and she is here because she needs to make a pitch for some participants in this research. Rachel, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Mark. Thanks
Hi.
for inviting us.
All right. What is HEAL, and what's the UofL's Environmental Health Institute? What are those things?
Great. So good questions. Let's start with the Envirome Institute. It is an institute within UofL that looks at how the environment affects health in people and communities. So as part of that overall umbrella, we have the study called HEAL, which is Health, Environment, and Action in Louisville, and it's incorporating the Green Heart Project and Superfund Center, and we're looking at how the environment affects people's health, and specifically cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and obesity. And we're looking at volatile organic compounds.
VOCs. You've told me
know
about
it,
these.
yeah.
I know this
You
because you
know
told me
these.
about them.
So these are a family of chemicals that are found in things like air pollution, household scented products. Cigarettes, yes, cigarettes, all sorts of different sources that can contribute to disease. And that's our specific focus in this study. So what we're doing is we're looking at the overall health of a certain area in Louisville. And this area is considered in the South Louisville area. It includes Hazelwood, Beachmont, Wilder Park, Oakdale, Jacobs, Wyandotte, and Taylorberry neighborhoods.
So basically, south of the Waterson Expressway in general in South Louisville.
In general, and kind of over near Churchill Downs area.
Right.
So, and we're going to see how the community looks health-wise this year. And we're inviting 700 participants in between the ages of 30 and 70 to come in realistically, hopefully over the next month. So this is an ambitious goal.
Okay.
So we need
Good luck
anyone in
finding
the
700
area.
people. So you're knocking on doors, I guess?
We're knocking on doors. We're putting things up in bus stops. We're sending out information in the mail, all sorts of different ways. And then we are doing another component in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. So starting this fall, we will be planting thousands and thousands of trees and bushes and shrubs because we're wondering if a greener city can mean a healthier you. So in these areas, they'll actually see the greenness level change, and then we'll come back in 2 years and see how that's affected their health.
I know exactly what you're doing because we went out to the school out on St. Margaret Mary, I think it was, out on Shelbyville Road where the trees were planted, and you took blood samples from some of the teachers and the students in there, and to see if there was any difference after you planted the greenery out front to keep the exhaust from Shelbyville Road to getting in their lungs and their bodies and affecting them that way. So that's essentially what you're doing. That's why you want these 700 people, right?
Correct. We're doing that on a much bigger scale because what we saw at St. Margaret Mary is that there was potential even within a month to see changes. We saw changes in the pollution that was behind the vegetated barrier. We saw changes in some of the health indices we looked at, and it was a very small number of people. And we did a much limited more limited scale on measurements than we are doing in this study. So, but it proved our concept that potentially trees can reduce air pollution. They could reduce your risk for heart disease, diabetes, obesity. We're also wondering if it will increase the sense of community and potentially also decrease stress levels. And we're kind of trying to figure out all these different pieces with this larger project.
And you need 700 people in South Louisville to sign up.
I
So if they
know.
want to do that, if they're interested in being part of this study and having trees planted in their yard,
Potentially. You don't have to, I want to throw
Okay.
that out there. You don't have to have a tree in your yard to be
Okay.
in the health study.
No.
But you
potentially
can, yes,
you're going to be planting these
absolutely.
thousands of trees in these neighborhoods, right?
Yes, and
So-
they can sign up to be contacted about a
okay.
tree.
So how do they do that
So
with the Environment
absolutely,
Institute?
with the Environment Institute, you can email us at greenheart@louisville.edu. We also have a Facebook page, Greenheart Louisville. They can email me directly, rachel.keith@louisville.edu. We also have a pre-screener where you can already see if you qualify for the study. It's called greenheartloustudy.com. And last but not least, we'll give you a phone number. It's 502-852-4236. Any of those methods will get you in contact with us.
So if you're one of those, 6 or 7 neighborhoods in South Louisville,
Absolutely.
from Churchill down south, basically to Iroquois Park,
Absolutely.
give Rachel a call or send her an email, and Rachel Keith, rachel.keith@louisville.edu, and she'll get you hooked up with the study, right?
We will.
Okay, and it'll be interesting to see what you find, if greenery really does better the health of folks in South Louisville.
We're excited, and we'd come back and share at that point.
And
if
I
you'd
can't wait
have
till you
us.
do. That's right. All right. Thank you, Rachel, for being on the program. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that'll about do it for this edition of U of L Today with Mark Hebert, which you can hear every Monday and Tuesday night at 6 on 93.9 The Ville. You can also listen to the podcast of the shows on SoundCloud or watch the programs on Metro TV or KETKY throughout the week. Check out all the U of L news, videos, and events at uoflnews.com. Thanks for listening to U of L Today with Mark Hebert. Go Cards!